Every time someone tries to uncover the Epstein truth, the story gets buried just a little deeper. Not because there's nothing there, but because the closer anyone gets, the more powerful the resistance becomes. And this week, when Congressman Thomas Massie went head-to-head with FBI Director Kash Patel, that resistance was on full display. What happened in that hearing didn't just raise eyebrows. It ripped the curtain off a system that spent years protecting the most untouchable names in the world. When Epstein's name resurfaced in Congress, the air was heavy. Cameras rolled, papers shuffled, and then Massie dropped 4 documents straight into the record, each one more explosive than the last. The first quoted a former official saying,
At Epstein, and then, yes.
Without objection, the gentleman will hold for a second. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one UC request. This is Judge Engelmeyer's decision from August in U.S. versus Epstein, stating the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files dwarfs the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, you've seen most of the files, who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself? You replied, according to the transcript, there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007 and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors, such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information. And we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of 2 different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said
I named one today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice and FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file, and I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us.
Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein?
If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads.
Have you made any progress on the pipe bomb investigation January 6th? And have you made any progress on the motive of the Las Vegas shooter?
As to the first, it's an ongoing investigation, and we have made progress. As to the second, sir, I'll have to get back to you.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous
Gentleman
consent
yields back.
request.
Unanimous consent request from the gentleman from New York.
I ask unanimous consent to introduce an unsigned memorandum from July 7, 2025 that says we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties with the insignia of the Department of Justice and the FBI.
Without objection.
I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. The second warned of his supposed CIA connections. The third, a digital report revealing meetings between Epstein and top government officials. And the fourth, a Wall Street Journal investigation documenting dozens of encounters between Epstein and a former Israeli prime minister who once ran his nation's military intelligence. The moment Massie finished reading, it wasn't theater anymore. It was exposure. He wasn't chasing conspiracy. He was showing evidence the government already had. When Patel took the microphone, his words were calm, rehearsed, precise, the tone of someone who's testified too many times before. Massie asked the question millions have wondered for years. Who, if anyone, did Jeffrey Epstein traffic victims to besides himself? Patel's answer landed like a brick wall. There is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. The room went still, because everyone knew what that really meant. Credible is the word people in power use when they want truth to disappear behind paperwork. Victims have said for years that the FBI holds detailed FD 302 reports naming at least 20 men, bankers, politicians, entertainers, even a royal prince. These are official witness statements, not internet chatter. And yet Patel admitted he hadn't personally reviewed those files. His agents had. He simply trusted their summary that nothing new was credible. Massie pressed harder. How can you say there are no names if you haven't read the documents yourself? Patel's response was clinical. Multiple U.S. attorneys reviewed the materials across 3 administrations and found nothing to indict. It was the kind of answer that sounds responsible but reeks of avoidance. Because reviewed doesn't mean released, and found nothing doesn't mean nothing was there. What happened next pulled the mask off the entire machine. Massie reminded Patel that the constraints of Epstein's original plea deal only applied to Florida, not New York, where the 2019 indictment came from. That's where those FD 302s were filed. Victims cooperated. Names were given. And still, no new indictments. No new arrests. Just silence. Then Massie asked the question everyone was thinking, but no one dared to say out loud. Did Epstein have ties to intelligence agencies? Patel hesitated. He said the FBI had reviewed everything provided by interagency partners. Translation? They looked only at what the CIA chose to share. When Massie asked if he'd personally seen the CIA file on Epstein, Patel said he hadn't, and that if one existed, he'd be willing to review it. It was a polite dodge, but it revealed something chilling. The FBI doesn't even know what the CIA knows. That's not just secrecy. That's compartmentalization, one of the oldest tricks in intelligence. Divide information so completely that no single person can see the full picture. That way, no one can ever be held accountable. And that brings us to the heart of this scandal. Epstein's protection wasn't coincidence. It was structure. He moved through circles of power like a ghost because the system made room for him. His 2008 plea deal wasn't a fluke. It was the blueprint. He served 13 months of part-time confinement while victims were silenced, files sealed, and evidence labeled sensitive. After his release, he continued flying private, meeting presidents, scientists, investors, even members of royal families. Anyone else would have been destroyed by exposure. Epstein was rewarded with access. Why? Because he wasn't just a criminal. He was useful. Some reports suggest Epstein's network served as a bridge between business elites and intelligence interests, where information was currency. Photographs, guest lists, hidden recordings, tools that could ruin reputations or control them. If even a fraction of that is true, then his operations weren't ignored. They were protected. And that's what makes Patel's testimony so unnerving. His insistence on no credible evidence isn't a denial of wrongdoing. It's an admission that truth is defined by those who own the evidence. Victims can speak, journalists can investigate, lawmakers can demand, but until the institutions themselves decide something is credible, it never becomes real. The deeper tragedy is that the victims were once promised justice. They gave interviews, signed statements, trusted the system. And now those same statements are gathering dust inside classified vaults. Some victims have said their words were edited, minimized, or labeled unreliable. Others claim they were told not to speak publicly for their own protection. In reality, that protection was for someone else, the men whose names filled those redacted pages. So what are we left with? An FBI that claims to be transparent, a Department of Justice that hides behind procedure, and intelligence agencies that operate like ghosts. Each says, "We've done our part." None will tell the full story. This isn't incompetence, it's control. Secrecy is not the byproduct of power. It's the mechanism that keeps power intact. The CIA may have a file on Epstein, or maybe multiple files. The FBI might have evidence that never sees daylight. Congress asks questions, gets redacted pages, and calls that oversight. Meanwhile, the public, supposedly the ones being served, get nothing but press releases and carefully worded statements. And here's where it gets even darker. When institutions hide behind ongoing investigations year after year, it's not because they're still searching for truth. It's because the truth is too explosive to release. Some of these documents are sealed not for national security, but for personal security, the protection of reputations that, if destroyed, could ripple through governments, banks, and global alliances. Every redaction is a warning. This goes higher than you think. But as Patel sat before Congress, it was clear even he was trapped. Whether he's protecting someone or simply following orders, he's part of a chain that doesn't allow deviation. That's how systems built on secrecy survive, by ensuring no single person knows enough to bring it down. Patel's calm tone wasn't confidence. It was containment, and Massie knew it. His frustration showed when he compared the FBI's obsession with small-time investigations to its silence on Epstein. How could an agency chase social media rumors but ignore sworn victim testimony? Why were influencers granted access to DOJ materials before the victims themselves were allowed to review their own statements? These weren't slip-ups. They were choices, because the closer you get to the truth, the higher the wall gets to. Epstein's world was built on the illusion of exclusivity. Private jets, secret islands, elite guests. But his real business was leverage. Information was his currency. That's why he met with intelligence officials, why he kept meticulous logs, why people in power feared being seen with him. The files aren't dangerous because they're fake. They're dangerous because they're real. And yet, each time those files come close to release, something happens. New legal barriers, privacy claims, procedural delays. It's the same playbook every time. Deny, delay, distract. Wait long enough, and the outrage fades. People move on. The victims lose hope, but not everyone forgets. This new wave of hearings is proof that some in Congress still want the full picture. They're not just asking what Epstein did, they're asking who he did it for. That question is the one the system can't afford to answer. Because if those names come out, it's not just reputations at stake. It's the legitimacy of the very agencies claiming to protect us. The irony is brutal. The same government that demands transparency from others runs from it at home. It lectures about justice abroad while sealing evidence at home. It praises whistleblowers in speeches while silencing them in practice. That if democracy means accountability, then we're watching it being rewritten in real time. That Massie's confrontation with Patel wasn't about politics. It was about truth versus machinery. A congressman fighting a system designed to absorb pressure without ever changing. And for once, the cracks showed us what happens now. That depends on us. Because the people who benefit from secrecy count on one thing: public exhaustion. They know that outrage has a shelf life. They know that after every revelation, after every bombshell headline, the world eventually moves on. But truth doesn't fade. It waits. It waits in redacted lines, in sealed files, in testimonies no one's allowed to read. And one day, those buried truths will resurface, because they always do. Until then, we have a choice: to accept the silence or challenge it, to let the system decide what's credible, or to demand the evidence ourselves. Because if we can't name the men who exploited children simply because they're powerful, then justice is no longer blind. It's bound. So keep watching. Keep asking questions. Refuse to let this story die in committee rooms or behind classified labels. Because justice doesn't vanish, it's buried. And it's up to us to dig it back out. If you believe truth still matters, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and stay curious. Because the stories they want buried are always the ones that matter most.